So hello, welcome to my presentation, Our Illustrious Dead, Post-Mortem Abraham Lincoln. My name is Lee, and I am a self-described Lincoln post-mortem historian, and I say that because there are none other like me that I know of. There are many historians. This is one area of scholarship in Lincoln scholarship that's overlooked and underdone. And I happen to have a license as a funeral director and embalmer. And I remember one day in class in Worsham College, in embalming class, Dr. Timothy Kowalski talking to us about the Lincoln embalming. And I was fascinated, especially when I found out that 36 years after he died, on September 26, 1901, they opened his casket one last time and looked in on him, and that he was still very much intact. He was embalmed, and he was very much intact. And then they sealed the casket, made their affidavits, and then buried him in steel and concrete, where he's been to this day with no air or water that can reach him, so that he should look exactly like he did September 26, 1901, maybe with some more white mold that was growing on him. But that was fascinating to me, so this started me down this road. So I'm going to start this video for you, and then I'll go right into it. At the end, we'll have questions. I can answer all your questions. If I go a little long, come up a little short, I'll answer all of your questions at the end. Okay, so April 15th is the day he actually died. He was shot April 14th, 1865, which was Good Friday. And he was at the theater that was shown in the video, Ford's Theater, around 10:30. They carry him across the street, and he is unconscious. The death watch begins. He dies the following morning at 7:22 a.m. Everything happens on April 15th that I'm going to tell you about in this video presentation. So this is a picture of the catafalque that they had in the old state building when his funeral was in Springfield, May 3rd and May 4th. And for those who may not be able to see it, I'll read it for you. The doors were thrown open, the coffin lid was removed, and we who had known the illustrious dead in other days, and before the nation lay its claim upon him, moved sadly through and looked for the last time on the silent, upturned face of our departed friend. All day long and through the night, a stream of people filed reverently by the catafalque. Some of them were his colleagues at the bar, some his old friends from New Salem, some crippled soldiers fresh from the battlefields of the war, and some were little children who, scarcely realizing the impressiveness of the scene, were destined to live and tell in children yet to be born the sad story of Lincoln's death. And this is from the writings of Mr. William Herndon, who was Lincoln's law partner until he left for Washington, D.C. Herndon was actually the first person to put together biographical information on Lincoln, get all the background going back to Kentucky and Indiana and all that. And they relied on him very heavily until the middle of the 20th century when Abraham Lincoln's presidential papers were finally available to the public. Abraham Lincoln's son, Robert Todd Lincoln, made it so that you could not see the papers until I think it was 26 years after his death, to make sure that nobody was going to be embarrassed or scandalized. I could use my clicker here, but somehow I don't trust it. I've never used it before. So, our illustrious dead. So Lincoln is shot in the rear of the head at Ford's Theater. The unconscious president is taken across the street to the Peterson house, which is a boarding house. He's taken into a back bedroom on the first floor, laid diagonal across a spindle bed because he was too long for the bed. And then that's where the death watch started. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, generals, doctors, Mary Lincoln, Robert Todd Lincoln. Quite a scene. He dies at 7:22 a.m. The president's warm and limp body is transported to the White House at approximately 9:30 a.m. So me being who I am in the business that I've been in, I start to look at this from the point of view of the people that started to take care of the body and what happened with the body. Oh, it worked. Yay. This is Frank T. Sands. Frank T. Sands is often called government undertaker. During the war, they had different government undertakers in different places, and their job, they got the job by way of being the lowest bidder. They would go within a certain radius, pick up bodies for the government soldiers, bring them back, make sure that they were taken care of, transported where they needed to go. Frank T. Sands is the government undertaker for D.C. By the way, that's in the Library of Congress. That's my dirty hands that's holding it. And this is the only card that's available still that his family had given this to the Library of Congress. His company was actually called Sands and Harvey at that time. Harvey comes into play more in the story of Lincoln's death. So it's Frank T. Sands is the undertaker, which is different from an embalmer. I'll make that distinction right now. So Major General Daniel H. Rucker was with the Quartermaster's Department. Knowing they needed to transport Mr. Lincoln to the White House, he went to their shop. Lois Sanford of Sands and Harvey said, the morning he died, General Rucker came immediately to our shop, that's the way he wrote it, and had a common pine box made to bring. Now the way he wrote that, it sounds like they made it on the spot. Lincoln was 6'4", and they didn't want to be crowding the recently assassinated president in his box. So they made a pine box, common pine box, took it to the Peterson house, put him in it, and they put a flag over the top of it. This is in the Chicago History Museum, and this is the flag with 36 stars that they claim is the one that went on his temporary casket. Now I've decided if the casket was 6'6", to accommodate the president, and I took the dimensions of the flag, it did not cover the entire casket. Something that would be interesting to me as a funeral director embalmer. Now this is regarded as the hearse that took Lincoln from the Peterson house to the White House. I have not seen the provenance. It's no longer at the museum where you see it here. If it were not the exact hearse, it was in DC at that time. There was only so many undertakers. They all needed a hearse at some point, or they rented it from a stable, I don't know which. But it came from DC at that time. Now, when they put Lincoln in the back of the hearse, it was done by 6 men of the Quartermaster's Department. Those men, Generals Rucker, General Auger, Captain Peloise, some other officers, followed the hearse up 10th Street, very slow, took a left at G Street, onto the White House. I should throw in here too, Secretary of War Edwin Stanton had ordered all the bells in DC to start ringing to let everybody know of the calamity. If you heard a bell in my video, that bell is at a church that was there when Lincoln died. I don't know if it's the same bell, it's the same church. And I was in DC and I took a video of the bell, and then I used the audio, and there's a little part where the bell rings, it goes, it sounds like a dreadful sound I put in there. That was a car going by, but it worked out great. So that was an actual bell along the route. They take the route back to the White House, go to the north side, there was a gate right there at that time that they would come and go by. And again, I'll read. I had pushed forward and taken, whoops, balloon. Oh, that's not good.
If it makes you feel any better, we can hear you without it. Yeah.
Yeah, gonna be doing it without it. It says, I had pushed forward and taken my place on the sidewalk close to the carriageway, and turning to look at the little funeral cortege approaching, I saw an old Negro woman, a typical Southern cook, her head wrapped in a red and yellow bandana and her large blue and white kitchen apron still on, come running across the street. She passed in front of the hearse and had no difficulty in taking her place beside me within 2 feet of where it would pass. Even at that early hour, the Negroes of the Capitol had been stunned then driven to almost frenzy by the rumor that now Mr. Lincoln was dead, they would all be put back into slavery. As the little procession passed in, great tears rolled down the cheeks of that old negress, and she gathered her big apron over her face and sobbed aloud. She dropped her apron and said in a firm but broken voice, "They needn't to crow yet, God ain't dead." And that was Robert Brewster Stanton. Stanton, no relation to Edwin Stanton, Secretary of War. So cranial autopsy was scheduled. by Dr. Robert King Stone, who was at the Peterson house that evening. He had charge of the case. And he had charge of the case, but it would have taken Surgeon General Joseph K. Barnes as well, who was attached to the Secretary of War, to order this. But they order it to go into the northwest corner bedroom, which was not used at that time, and I'll get into that. So they take the 6 quartermaster men, take the pine box up the stairs into there, and all they have is a makeshift table to put on. It was workhorses and boards with sheets laid across it. Now this is the staff. This is some of the people who were there and who performed the cranial autopsy. Excuse me. Surgeon General Joseph K. Barnes is in charge, along with Lincoln's doctor. Joseph Barnes went on to also do John Wilkes Booth autopsy. I don't have the exact quote right now, but the autopsy notes that he turned into Secretary of War when Stanton made clear that he suffered greatly at the end and all the horrors of dying were evident. They really didn't like John Wilkes Booth at this point. So this is a surgeon, Joseph, I think you say it is Janvier, Janvier Woodward. And he's the head surgeon for the head surgeon for the cranial autopsy. This is the Assistant Surgeon General, Charles Crane. He does nothing but attend, but he's there in official capacity. I believe he was there at the Peterson house too that night. And then we have Assistant Surgeon Edward Curtis. Edward Curtis gives us our only glimpse into the autopsy. There's another account that I can't vouch for. Everything is said there. Somebody 30 years later says, you know, what they believe happened, but they seem to aggrandize their own role and everything. He wrote a letter to his mother 1 week afterwards and described in great detail and flowery, almost poetic detail at times. And last but least, this is George Otis. He is the curator of the Medical Museum. All these gentlemen you see are starting something called the Army Medical Museum, which I want you to just put a mental bookmark on this guy. It is said the Surgeon General's office has put out a list of people who were at the autopsy, and it says he's there, but I've never seen it anywhere else. And I don't know if that's true or not. In my world, I don't tell you it's true unless I can prove it, or there's good reason to believe he was there. But keep a bookmark there. And does this man just not look like a cartoon character? Look at that face. But he becomes very important later on at the archives of the National Museum of Health and Science, which was the Army Medical Museum, are named after him. He became very important. This is the Prince of Wales room. This is the second floor, northwest corner bedroom. This is from 1870. They, of course, used it April 15th, 1865. The president right away was Johnson. I don't believe Johnson did any redecorating. At this point, it was either Johnson or it was Grant who was the president, and I feel that this is exactly the same way it was then. This bed was purchased by Mary Lincoln. It's in the Lincoln bedroom now, not in this side of the building, but the southeast side of the building. She purchased it in Philadelphia along with a great many other things she purchased. And I look around the room and I feel like I can confidently say that this is how it looked, especially when we get into the description Edward Curtis gives us. But first I need to tell you, I forgot my own slide. This is the bed and the room that 11-year-old Willie Lincoln died in February 20th, 1862. He and his brother both contracted bilious fever or typhoid-like symptoms. Nobody ever actually said it was typhoid fever. Willie had scarlet fever a few years before that, and they believe he had internal damage from that, so he did not survive this fever. His younger brother Tad did. But this is the room that he passed away in and the bed that he passed away in. Mary Lincoln is said to have never entered this room again after Willie's death. Not that room or the green room on the first floor where he was put into his coffin and first embalmed and put into his coffin in the last place that she saw him. She did not attend his funeral. She was upstairs distraught. So as I said, Edward Curtis gives us the only good description of the events. It says, the Surgeon General was walking up and down the room when I arrived and detailed me the history of the case. He said that the President showed most wonderful tenacity of life, and not his wound had been necessarily mortal, might have survived an injury to which most men would succumb. And to that I'll add that I didn't have time to put all the different quotes of the people that once they saw the nude body of the 16th president, everybody was amazed. This man was 180 pounds soaking wet, but he was incredibly muscular, not a bit of fat on him anywhere. Everybody was completely amazed. So they said, you know, he might have survived something most men wouldn't. He was in very good shape for a 56-year-old. It says the room contained but little furniture, a large heavily curtained bed, a bureau, wardrobe, chairs, and around the room were several general officers, some civilians, silent or conversing in whispers, and to one side, stretched upon a rough framework of boards and covered only with sheets and towels, lay cold and immovable what but a few hours before was the soul of a great nation. Now these are the two that are in charge, and I've looked into whether it was just something that was, you know, kind of agreed to that day, or if they actually felt that, you know, a doctor who does not have military status was in charge. And years later at one of the trials, Surratt trial, Surgeon General is still referring to him making choices. Dr. Robert Kingstone, who was the president's family's doctor, most definitely had the esteem of Washington, D.C. He was considered the dean of the medical community. He died a few years later, but everything you read where he's talking, he is so gracious to all the other doctors, just so gracious. He was beloved. He was actually a doctor of eye diseases. Don't know why he ends up as the president's doctor. He was also the one who told President Lincoln that Willie was getting better. So, this is Senator Orville Hickman Browning from Illinois. He was a senator for just a very short time. When Senator Douglas died, he was replaced by the Illinois Congress representatives. And then election time came around, and the Democrats took over. They kicked him out. So then he became a lawyer in D.C., but he was very close confidant of Abraham Lincoln. I've held his diary. I've seen the entries. He was there constantly, and Lincoln confided in quite a bit. Matter of fact, when Willie died, Lincoln and his wife were so distraught, they asked him to take over funeral arrangements, take over everything, and he did. They couldn't function. And when Willie was being embalmed in the green room, he was there. I don't know, this is a different time. This is a very different time that people would sit in on these things. So they're gonna have a cranial autopsy of his friend, and Orville Browning is there. He's not a doctor. Of course, this is Major General Christopher excuse me, Christopher Columbus Auger, and he has, as I believe, he has the control command of the forces around D.C. at this time, and he follows the president's body as it's taken through the country, and he's there for the autopsy. I should note too, Edwin Stanton followed the body up to this room, the Secretary of War. The account says he broke down in tears. He was a kind of a hefty man, and he just absolutely bawled like a baby. This man was very, very close to Lincoln, and he was a very emotional guy. And he ordered that a guard of honor be around Lincoln's body at all time. A major general and officers would never leave this body until the moment it was deposited in Springfield. Major General Daniel H. Rucker, who I already told you about, his people, the quartermastermen, were the ones who carried the body. He actually gave the men that carried the body one of his shirts to divide amongst themselves. One of those patches of shirts is at the Union League in Philadelphia. I've seen it. It's framed with a letter and a picture of his daughter and stuff like that. But relics were a big thing. I could do a whole nother presentation just on the Lincoln assassination relics. It's insane, just the things that they have, the things that they kept, how they got them. This is Assistant Surgeon Charles S. Taft, and he's not in uniform, but he was Army at that time, and he was actually at the theater when Lincoln was shot. The first surgeon in the box was a Dr. Charles Leal. Taft was the second one. He got lifted up from the stage to get in the box. And Taft is there throughout the night and the next day. So you're seeing, we're getting a lot of people in this room. There was a lot of people. I don't even know everybody who was there. This is Assistant Surgeon William Knotson. He did not really have a hand. He was the third man, in the autopsy. And it said that during the autopsy that the Surgeon General told him to go to William Seward, the Secretary of State's home across Lafayette Park from the White House, to care for him. He had been attacked the same night by an intruder and was suffering, and his son was attacked too, and was part of his cranium was missing, showing his brain, and it was terrible. So it said that he was sent there, but that he was at the autopsy. And the reason to bring him up is this kit that is in the Smithsonian, looks like it's missing, some scissors, maybe some other stuff, is said to be his, left at the White House because he was going to Seward's house. They brought portable pathologist kits at the time. So you're opening the president's cranium, and you're going to need a saw. You would also need some other things like a hammer and chisel. It was not pleasant to sit there and watch your friend have his cranium, his skull cap taken off. I've seen it. It's not pleasant. So he says, Dr. Woodward and I proceeded to open the head and remove the brain down to the track of the ball. The latter had entered a little to the left of the median line at the back of the head and passed almost directly forward through the center of the brain and lodged. So we've got Edward Curtis and J.J. Woodward, and this is to show you, this is exactly what they did. They just took the top of the head off. Modern day pathologists might make a notch right here like you would for a pumpkin so you can place it, but they took this off. When he says they made, a removed brain down to the track of the ball, they were slicing in layers till they got down to the ball. And when they got there, it was just a really pulpous, bloody, straight line, and there was bone fragments in there. So Dr. Stone, another picture of him there, before he was a doctor, he actually had some background in art, some training in drawing, and he made these drawings. This is his drawing. This is where the shot, which was 1/2 inch diameter. They said it was 1/2 inch, it was inwardly beveled into the brain, and it was smooth. This would be the view from behind. If you broke away the skull where it entered, is above the cerebellum, almost to the lambdoid suture right there. So it's on the occipital bone. This is a view from the side of where the bullet entered the brain, and where he says it ended up. There's difficulty in if it went to the right side or if it stayed on the left side in the different accounts. To me, it doesn't matter, but I believe Dr. Stone thought that it stayed on the left side. It did not transverse to the right side. So not finding it readily, we proceeded to remove the entire brain when, as I was lifting the ladder from the cavity of the skull, suddenly the bullet dropped out through my fingers and fell, breaking the solemn silence of the room with its clatter into an empty basin that was standing beneath. Now remember, they had to bring their own tools, right? Their own instruments. So where's the basin? There's the basin right there. I wonder if that's the basin. I mean, it's decorated looks, but it looks like it's decorated, but the bottom looks like it could be white china. Sorry, I'm starting to stutter a little bit, trying to get ahead of myself. There it lay upon the white china, a little black mass, no bigger than the end of my finger, dull, motionless, and harmless, yet the cause of such mighty changes in the world's history as we may perhaps never realize. And this is that today. It was round, it had a little nip, it was a homemade bullet, lead, and they nipped it, so it had a little tail, but when it hit the skull, it flattened, and a little piece of it actually was found broken off at the occipital bone that stayed there, and it traveled through the brain. I brought the basin up a little bit more, so maybe you could try to picture that as where they found the bullet. Now, I also believe that what would have been in the basin, besides droplets of blood, is when you open the skull, there is the dura mater. It's the covering for the brain, and you have to remove that. And where you're going to place it, probably place it in the white china basin that's taken the wet medical waste at that time. So the U.S. Army Medical Museum is now the National Museum of Health and Science. These are the bones of the skull that were removed from Lincoln. Just concentrate on these ones for the moment. This is called a Nelaton probe. When he was still alive, after they got through sticking their fingers into the hole in his head, they took this Nelaton probe, which is metal, all metal, but it had a ceramic tip. And the idea was you put it in, and if you touched lead and you brought it back out, the white ceramic tip would show you that you've touched the ball. Well, they kept putting it in there and it gets stuck. Well, that's because there's the plug. You can kind of see there's a little bit of a roundness. When the ball hit the skull, it punched it through clean, and it's sitting in the track of the ball. So they kept hitting that. Of course, they probably stuck their fingers in it. And I'll get back to this. This is another piece of skull. Now, when they were finished, when they finished the autopsy and they had the skull frags and the bullet, Dr. Robert King Stone took a penknife and he carved A.L onto the lead bullet. He took the skull frags and he put it in this envelope He marched next door to the Secretary of War. The War Department was next door to the west. Marched into Secretary of War Edwin Stanton's office, gave it to Edwin Stanton, who then put it into another envelope, this envelope, and sealed it, and he marked it. And this went into evidence as this major, treasonous act, first of its kind. It became War Department material. And for some reason, they also took the Nelton probe, which I think that was just Dr. Crane or Taft. One of them had ordered it that night, and they entered it into evidence. I think they did it just to say, oh, look what I did, because there was no reason for it. So, these skull frags, there was 5 of them. Can you see how many skull frags are in there now? I discovered when I was at the Ford's Theater in DC doing research, this paper from the Department of Defense where on September 17, 1993, while they were cleaning, they knocked it on the floor. We had 5 skull frags, now we have 6. Keep that in mind too, we will come back to that. It says, I remained, and while the embalmers were working over the body silently, in one corner of the room, I prepared the brain for weighing. And I'm not showing you all of his text, but when he says he prepared the brain for weighing, he talks about washing it, and he had washed it in a basin. They did not have running water, of course. He also had a scale that he said he could not fit all the brain on at once. It leads me to believe he didn't bring an anatomical scale with him, that he worked with whatever was there. This was an afterthought. He had to weigh it piecemeal, he said. He had to ask for permission from the Surgeon General to do this, and this was in the interest of what they called anthropometrics. There was the pseudoscience in the 19th century and early part of the 20th century that the size of the brain, the convolutions of the brain, told you something about the man's intellect. And so the weight of the brain, he wanted to find out what the weight would be. And so we stuck around and weighed it. It says the weighing of the brain gave approximate results only since there had been some loss of brain substance in consequence of the wound during the hours of life after the shooting. That means just what you think it means. Brain was broken up, brain exited the back of the head. Matter of fact, one of the surgeons talks about as he was supporting the head from the Ford's Theater across the street to the Peterson house. By the time he got there, his hand was full. The other part of that too that is sad for me is Mary Lincoln was at the house that night. She only went in a few times and she was very distraught, and they would cover up, put napkins over the blood on the pillow and whatnot when she'd go in there. Robert Todd Lincoln, his son, was in the room a good deal that night, and they did not cover it up. So this poor man had to watch blood and brain matter ooze from his father's head all night.
And he was about maybe 18 at that time?
I think he was maybe 21. He was right about there. Okay, so he said the embalmers were there. So this is my hero as an embalmer. This is the guy. Hank or Henry Cattell. I just found out they called him Hank from a letter that hadn't been seen in a very long time, over a century. Somebody knew him, they called him Hank. By the way, it's also the name of my cat, Henry Cattell. This is where he worked. This is the only picture we know of on Pennsylvania Avenue at the Metropolitan Hall where Drs. Brown and Alexander did business. Dr. Charles DaCosta Brown and I'm blanking on the full name of Dr. Alexander. Dr. Brown was the lead in this company. Alexander worked in Norfolk. They were training embalmers to go out and take this patented Suquette form of embalming and then go out into the field. Dr. Brown is the one who got the rights from a professor in Paris who came up with this embalming technique to do it in America. I don't know why he had to pay, but he did. And it was working for him. So this is Dr. Charles DeCosta Brown, or at least we think it is, another researcher, scholar, says this was his picture, and then he died. And I don't have any citation to say this is actually him, so I want to be exact when I do things, and I say this is what we think he looks like. Dr. Charles DeCosta Brown and his brother were dentists in New York City. He bought the rights to the Sequet method of embalming. Dr. Brown was very high up in the Masons, and the more I researched this, the more I could just do a book just on the Masons' influence in everything, how people got the job because they were a Mason, how they were put into a place of importance because of Masons. They were everywhere. He was high up. And in 1856, in New York, Dr. Brown conferred degrees of Masonry on Edwin Booth, who you know who that is, right? John Wilkes Booth's older brother. Dr. Brown was also very involved in theater. They said he would sometimes leave his practice and go on tours with theater groups. He managed it's called the Broadway Theater in New York at one point. He was very much in the theater. It actually comes into play again in DC on the night of the assassination. But yes, so he knew and conferred the degrees of Masonry on Edwin Booth all those years ago, and he knew him after the assassination too. So Henry, or Hank, works for Drs. Brown and Alexander. And this is a new thing, the embalming. Up to this point, there was undertakers, okay? You put a lot of flowers on a body to cover them up. You had, a couple days wait, maybe put them on ice. But now you can embalm them, you could ship soldiers home, you could do all sorts of things. And this is their card. And I show you that because at the same time, here in Bloomington, this is what a broadside of a undertaker's advertisement looks like for H. Jeter, who was a block north of the courthouse here. And he says, embalming and deodorizing the dead as well. So that was the thing. You can be embalmed and we'll deodorize the dead. A body weighing approximately 150 to 180 pounds, 150 to 180 pounds will have between 1.2 and 1.5 gallons of blood. Okay, some of the things I've seen out there talk about, they put 2 to 3 gallons in Abraham Lincoln, and that's way too much. There's a lot of bad information out there. I've seen accounts where they say, first they drained the blood of Abraham Lincoln, and then they pumped it. And it's like, I don't know where they got their information, but you cannot drain the blood first. What happens is you put a cannula into an artery and you replace the blood, and the blood comes out a vein. And so you would need up to maybe 2 gallons. And what they used was zinc chloride. I don't know if anybody here has any background in chemistry. I did not know anything about zinc chloride until I researched it, and it's some pretty strong stuff. They would mix it themselves. And what it is hydrochloric acid and zinc. Let me repeat that. They're putting hydrochloric acid with zinc in it in a human body. This is going to have a dehydrating effect. This is going to have a preservative effect. This is going to turn a body into leather. And that's basically what happened as time went on to Abraham Lincoln's body. So I actually bought one of these, and I bought some lead, and I went out, I was gonna do this for you in an enclosed space. And I tried the experiment in my backyard, and the smell is so terrible that I knew I couldn't do it. But he had to mix up almost 2 gallons of it. Now, whether he did it before he got there, or if he did it in the room, I don't know. Well, the other thing I know about it is it gets very warm, and you don't want to put warm into a body. You know, that's going to contract. So maybe he did it in the room and did, you know, maybe 1.25 gallons and then added, diluted it with water. I don't know, to cool it down. But I'm going to show you exactly what happens when you put the lead into the hydrochloric acid.
You're saying lead, you mean zinc?
Zinc, yeah.
Okay.
So this is just a little amount. This is very small. And it looks like you have Dr. Frankenstein's thing going on. And imagine he's in the Prince of Wales room, and now he's doing that. He just lit the hydrogen that was coming out of there. It smells like hydrochloric acid, you know, Febreze everywhere. It's terrible. The thing is very warm. And then when you're done, when it's done doing all that, it's clear. It's very clear. So, he says only the ordinary embalming fluid was used, and I mixed that. Now, why did he say that? Henry is not just my hero because he's the guy that embalmed Lincoln. Everybody was trying to get in on, you know, being famous, infamous. People argued about, there's an argument about who put the coins on his eyes when he died. Everybody, you know, says I was the bodyguard to Lincoln. Everybody all over the place. Not Henry. Not Henry. He never gave any interviews. He did not go out and try to aggrandize himself. But in the 1890s, there was an embalmer that we were taught in embalming school was the father of modern day embalming, a guy named John Holmes. John Holmes was pretty mixed up. And he tried to claim the credit for embalming Lincoln and saying that he put him in this thing and you know, subjected the body to gas and all this stuff. So they go to Henry and he says, no, only the ordinary embalming fluid was used. I mixed it. And he says he was alone in the room when the embalming was done. And if he was mixing it, I can see why he'd be the only one in the room. But I'm telling you that was a lot of work for one guy. But there's been a lot of stories that Dr. Brown was in the room where Dr. Brown did it. All the newspapers just reported Dr. Brown did it. I happen to know, I found a reason why Dr. Brown would not have been there. Dr. Brown, being so close to theater, knew Harry Hawk. Harry Hawk was the actor who was on stage at Ford's Theater who delivered the line, well, I know enough to turn you inside out, you sock-dologizing old man-trap you. And then there's laughter. That was the laughter you heard in my video right before the gunshot. And then there's the gunshot. Well, Harry Hawk is subdued as a witness and put under a $1,000 bond. Dr. Charles DeCosta Brown puts up $1,000. And then they go out and they have a couple drinks, go to his house, then soldiers appear at Dr. Brown's house and bring him back to the Peterson house. He has to give testimony. When he left there, he did not go back to Dr. Brown's house. He actually tried to skip town. He went to the train station, was going to go to Philadelphia. They had locked the town down. Nobody's going in or out. And so he was rearrested. And I imagine Dr. Brown was out trying to get his $1,000 back for 1865 money on this guy who's trying to skip bond. So these are some, you know, just regular embalming surgeon instruments, just to give you an idea. You know, you've got your scalpel, you've got your cannula, that's what you would, the slender thing, hollow thing you would put into the artery. Got a aneurysm hook, forceps, different cannulas. And this is what they used back then. Today we would use something called a portaboy. It's a machine with a big glass container on top, and you pour everything into the top and set your pressure, and it goes. Back then, they were pumping it. As you can see, it's missing its main one. I don't really know what all of these would be used for. There's a lot of different ones like that. But so you were force pumping the embalming fluid, the zinc chloride, into an artery with a vein that's open at a different point so the blood can exit. This is an actual picture of a field embalmer. I believe his name was Bun Allen. I believe this was the bad guy. He set another guy's tent on fire and would sell embalming to soldiers and then different things like that. But he's using one of the pumps, and you can see he's got a line going in. There's even a stopcock on the cannula going into the carotid right there. He's actually embalming on a door. You can still see the hinge right there. So the Evening Star on Saturday, April 15th reported that it is expected, though nothing has been seen definitely determined upon, that the funeral of the late president will take place on or about Thursday next. It is supposed his remains will be temporarily deposited in Congressional Cemetery. And yes, this is as blurry as it looked when I got it off of newspapers.com. That morning, nobody had slept. Nobody. Everybody, the whole city had been up all night. They don't know what they're doing. The guy that I showed you, Senator Orville Browning, in his diary says he talks to Robert Todd Lincoln that morning. Mary is incommunicado. Mary Lincoln's in her bedroom screaming, and nobody can talk to her. Robert's like, I don't know, probably going back to Illinois. We don't know. So the only thing they can say is probably going back to Illinois, probably going to have a funeral Thursday, and other newspapers report probably be deposited at the receiving vault at Congressional Cemetery, which is very close to the Capitol. I took this picture myself. That is my Leonard Volk mask that I take to different places and get a picture of it, but the vault is still there. This is where they anticipated he was going. Why is that important? Why is it important that they did not know that he was going to go on this very long funeral trip? He dies and is embalmed on April 15th. On May 4th, 19 days later, he's finally put into the temporary vault in Springfield, Illinois. He has 12, count them, 12 major funerals in all of these cities except for Michigan City, major funerals. So this body that, if you would have taken extra care in the first place, if you thought I was going on this long trip, probably still wouldn't have been enough care, but he goes on this trip. So Dr. Brown, this sounds like it came directly from him. It says, the embalmer of the late president is Dr. Brown, and nobody got Henry Cattell right in the early days, who holds the right for the United States from Professor Sequet of Paris. By this process, I can't read that. By this process that was used by the Egyptians, nothing is removed from the body. I'm having trouble reading it. The brain and viscera are left intact. The doctor claims to be able to arrest the process of dissolution. He cannot restore a body to its lifelike appearance before death, but he does claim to be able to preserve it in just the condition in which he receives it. What is the material used by the embalmer? We are not informed. It's zinc chloride. But whatever it is, the antiseptic fluid is injected into the carotid by means of a force pump. The effect of this substance is to make the body like marble. Dr. Brown informs our reporter that the body of the president will never know decay. After a time, it will lose its marbleized appearance and become, to a certain extent, mummyized. It will not perceptibly change for several months. There's a few things in there that I want you to keep in mind. Brain and viscera being left intact, and that it would be mummyized. He knew that it would be, to an extent, mummyized. So when they embalmed Lincoln, by all accounts, they used the right femoral for injection. It's a big vein, easy to get to, great vein to use for injection. And then they use the right internal jugular to, excuse me, to drain the body. Now, we've got the skull cap is off, right? He's injecting, the skull cap is off, and that's a problem. And the other problem is that they left the viscera intact. Nowadays, embalmers use a trocar. This was not even invented at the time Lincoln was embalmed. They left the viscera intact. Sometimes I read they would make a incision into the abdomen and put some fluid in there. Well, what you need is a trocar with a sharp end. Nowadays, it's attached to a hose to a hydroaspirator that has a sucking effect. And you 2 inches to their anatomical left and 2 inches up, you puncture it. And you do the entire thoracic cavity, but you must do the viscera. You must do the intestines. Why do you have to do the intestines? I mean, even if you don't evacuate the intestines with the suction, you need to puncture the intestines because, now I think this is from Gettysburg Battlefield. I don't know which one, but I don't want to disrespect the dead here, but they are a good example. This body has gaseous distension. The intestines, intact, are building up bacteria. The bacteria's name is Clostridium perfringens, and it stays in the intestines, and its byproduct is the gaseous, the smell, the gas that expands the abdomen. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to think ahead here. If you puncture somebody that has the distension, it's just as you think. It would be pop and it would smell really badly. Lincoln's viscera were left intact. I do not have proof, but my training tells me that at some point he started to have gaseous distension. It can push purge through the mouth, it can make it smell, it can start to bloat. I've seen 2 places where they said this happened, but they give no citation, even though I know it had to happen. By the time we got to Columbus, Ohio. But then you have Indianapolis, you have Michigan City, you have Chicago, you have Springfield, and there's no more mention of it. So I want to get to the bottom of what happened. If they had problems, it would have been leakage from the incision points, but the only thing you could see on Lincoln was his face. He had gloves on his hands, white leather kid gloves. So I'm looking for any proof that they had to keep up the body in any way. The thing that got me interested in Lincoln in the first place, and thus that drew me in mostly, was the story that Lincoln was re-embalmed several times. Maybe some of you have heard that. Hogwash. You cannot repickle a pickle, okay? The only thing you could see on Lincoln anyway was his face. So they had the undertaker and they had the embalmer, and each of them had an assistant that followed the body on the funeral train for all of the funerals, and they looked after the body. Now the body, as it went along, started to get darker. The face was turning darker. I could have listed many accounts up here where the reporters talk about it's a bad embalming. He's decaying. He's looking terrible. He was drying out. They stuck zinc chloride in him, and then they put tens of thousands of people, with respiration, perspiration, through these halls, dragged him through a street in every city, on a train, everywhere. He was just simply drying out. I personally had a body, cranial autopsy, that I had to embalm that had more than one visitation, and we can use cream and cosmetics, and they started turning dark on me. What they were doing with Lincoln, they kept, what they said, chalking his face. So I looked up what the chalk was. Talcum powder. What does talcum powder do?
Sure.
It's to get rid of moisture. So they kept putting talcum powder on his face going, I don't understand, he keeps getting darker. So anyway, they got the problem with the viscera. He's turning dark. Now, this is a big one. They took his brain out, all of it. It was in pieces. You know, what'd they do with it? A trained embalmer today would not put that brain back into that skull. Matter of fact, most autopsies are also, you know, of a thoracic, abdominal kind, and they would just put the brain with the rest of the organs that were taken out back here. So they should have known better, but they thought he's going to Congressional Cemetery, right? At the base of the skull, the skull pan, there's something, if anybody here has their textbooks out, there's something called the circle of Willis. And this is the vessels that feed blood to the brain and communicates blood from one side to the other. So they cut that when they took the brain out. So now at the bottom of the skull pan, they have to tie off the circle of Willis, right? So that it doesn't bleed or drain anymore. If they put that brain back into that skull, thinking that it's not going to be a problem, there's the issue that the brain is the first thing that decomposes. It's mostly water. So I contacted a pathologist to prove my point, and he said the brain would almost certainly decompose during that time period in question. It would likely enter a semi-solid state with liquid characteristics capable of leakage. Any openings in the skull would allow for leakage. The tissue portion of the skull could contain this liquid provided there was adequate suturing of incisions and the original wound. Remember, he's got a 1/2-inch diameter hole back here, and now he's got a line of separation. And when they took the skull off, they had to cut back here, bring the skin forward, bring it back, and sew it up. So he's talking about if the suturing was adequate on both of those, it might actually hold liquid. I asked, what about the ears? Could we have leakage from the ears? It would strike me as unlikely there being any distension as a result of gases generated by decomposition, as the head was likely not adequately sealed to allow for a gas buildup. The ears may or may not leak depending on the patency of any route through the skull caused either by the gunshot wound or subsequent autopsy activity. So I'd asked if the brain is decomposing, could it build up gas and force it out? And he said probably not sealed up. There's no way it's sealed. So the time period between April 15th and May 4th was adequate time for this brain to decompose and become liquid. And I wanted to drive that point home. The brain would almost certainly decompose during the time period in question. It would likely enter a semi-solid state with liquid characteristics capable of leakage. What is this? There we go. Okay. So I told you to keep a mental note, bookmark for George Otis. George Otis, if he was involved in any way, shape, or form, had knowledge of this, it stands to reason that he would have probably wanted a sample, all of the brain. We have no record that the Army Medical Museum took the brain. Maybe it was because everybody was running around, nobody knew what was going on. Maybe they thought it was just not done to take the brain or any part of it. They didn't realize that it was going to, just be put to waste. I worked on the longest time on the idea that maybe with the blood, the drainage, that the embalmer got rid of the brain. And I don't think so. I think it went back into the skull. And so I work at trying to find any proof of that. But he's working on the medical museum. A 2008 blog about the medical museum, now the National Museum of Health and Science, called it a repository for bottled monsters. And I just want to give you an idea of the kind of things they had there and why it wouldn't be ridiculous that they would have took Lincoln's brain and preserved it. It was founded May 21st, 1862, a year into the Civil War, when Surgeon General William A. Hammond directed Union doctors to gather specimens of morbid anatomy together with projectiles and foreign bodies removed. So the field surgeons had an order to send parts and projectiles. Scores of deformed slugs pulled from the flesh of the Civil War's victims sit like grimy jewels in these glasses, not far from trays of splintered bones and punctured skulls in the conflict. And I've been there this year. There's plenty of punctured skulls. And some of the things they have are the vertebra from the slain President James A. Garfield with the hole made by the assassin's bullet, slides of President Ulysses S. Grant's tumor, part of John Wilkes Booth's spine, the brain, and the skeleton of President Garfield's assassin. So they were into collecting. This all culminated in a large volume called Medical and Surgical History of the War of the Rebellion, which George Otis and Woodward had a lot to do with, as well as Curtis. This is actually the leg of General Dan Sickles. He lost it at Gettysburg. It's been on display ever since. And there it is. They said he used to visit it sometimes. These are the cuffs of the undershirt Dr. Edward Curtis was wearing when he performed the autopsy of Abraham Lincoln. When he got home, his wife cut them off and saved them, but that's not all they saved. Remember the other small splinter of bone that I talked about? When he says he waited till he got home to clean his instruments, and when he got home, he found a splinter of bone. So the other bones went straight to the War Department as evidence. So what do you think he did? He mailed it to his mom. He wrote a letter and he mailed the splinter to the mail to his mom.
Happy Mother's Day.
So I put this up. This is actually my photo, which is why I could not take it without any glare. I took this year. These are the pieces of the skull, 5, then 6, as they are now. Do you notice anything strange about them now?
Different colors.
They're glued. They glued them to the wood. I'm beside myself. I don't have a degree in museumology or anything, but gluing the only known fragments of Lincoln's skull to the wood, so if he dropped it again, it's terrible. So I just wanted to complain about that. So these are the things in the medical museum that when I write my book, I plan to explore every reason why they should have got it, but they didn't. So what happened to the brain? So this is the casket they put him in. Remember I talked about Sands and Harvey, and that Harvey being a part of the story. There's also Harvey and Company, which is an undertaker that does business with Sands and Harvey, and also does business with Brown and Alexander. They built this casket. It's 6'6", it's made of walnut, it's lined interior with lead, silver all around. They call these things shamrocks, but I don't think they look like a shamrock to me. But anyway, this was like the casket. In that time, it's money, it cost over $1,400. And it looks great, but it's white satin pillow, white interior. If he's leaking, if there's any problem, it's going to show up. He's got a line of suture back here. That was in New York, by the way. That's the only known picture of him in his casket. Here's one of the cities he's being taken through. The body's being shaken everywhere it goes. If his viscera is intact, if he's hot, if he's being moved around a lot, this is going to have an effect on the body. And these men right here, they're the Veteran Reserve Corps, all first sergeants, 25 of them. The Veteran Reserve Corps was what they called the Invalid Corps. These were men that were hurt, could not go back into action, so they found other things for them to do. Well, Secretary of War decided they would be the only ones who could handle the casket. They would not leave the casket side. And you can call it casket or coffin, whichever you like. This is a colorized picture from another city. Sometimes I really like the colorized, sometimes I don't. This one I think is nice. It really brings out the casket, and that's the true color of their uniforms. There's a silver plate on there with his name, date of birth, 16th president, and all that. That's the only thing that remains of the casket. This is another story altogether that I'm looking for. This casket disappears at one point. So day 11, which is New York, it says the appearance of the president bears no marks of pain, but the eyes are sunken, somewhat discolored and swollen about the upper part, dark about the eyes and cheeks, and lips are very slightly compressed. The body will not again be exposed to view until it arrives at Springfield. So this is the 11th day, and they're reporting that they're not going to have any more open caskets. They did, but the body is turning dark, and they're starting to use chalk to change that. It says the eyes are sunken, of course. The eyes lose their shape, all the fluid goes, and the eyes would be sunken. Today we have something, little half circle caps that you put under the eyes that hold the shape of the eyelid. So they sent Dr. Charles Acosta Brown and Frank Sands and an assistant apiece on this trip. They all had to have, you've seen your ancestors, yeah.
Except for the names different.
So this is actually Charles Brown's pass for free transportation on the funeral train. It's at the Abraham Lincoln Library Museum in Springfield. And they were to look after the body. So I say, if there was any evidence of anything going wrong, I want to find it, okay? They dressed Lincoln on April 16th, thereabouts, in the suit that they say he wore to his second inaugural. It's the one you're thinking of, with the tie and the coat and, all that. And the collars to his shirt were detachable. So this is the back of a letter from 1865, Dr. Charles Acosta Brown, from a auction that happened around the turn of the century. And on it, it says, hair and shirt collar of President Lincoln. I've seen another auction where it said that Dr. Brown had a small box full of his hair that he kept. And this goes into another story of the relics and what they kept. Why did he have a shirt collar? Why did he need to change the shirt collar unless he had leakage? Or if he had leakage back here and it got on the shirt collar, maybe, ruined the pillow. I'm looking for evidence, but this is a very nice clue. He kept the shirt collar, and later on it went into an auction. I guess I enlarged it for you, didn't I? Now, when they got to Springfield, and this is my last slide, they put Abraham Lincoln and his son Willie, who made the trip with him, into the temporary vault inside these walnut outer casket containers that were made by Harvey and Company. Willie made the trip inside that box in the funeral train, and they put Lincoln in after they got him to the cemetery. And this is an actual picture of them in the temporary vault where they stayed until December of 1865, where they had a brick temporary vault made there on Monument Hill to put him in until he went into the monument they were making for him in 1871. And I'm going to leave it on this as you gaze and ponder about it. And I want to share with you this little tidbit that I have here. They kept taking his hair. Robert Todd Lincoln was in on it, the embalmers were in on it, everybody's getting hair. Secretary of War, Speaker of the House, Colfax, Mary sent people in there, her cousins kept coming back. We have accounts of them just coming back. At one point, when they opened Lincoln's casket, over the many times until September 26, 1901, somebody nicked hair again, and it ended up in the Oliver Barrett collection. It says, taken at the tomb. Two gentlemen scholars, Gerald McMurdy and James Hickey, bought this lot, split it, and then each of them split it again and sold it and made money on the hair. This is hair taken from Abraham Lincoln after he had been buried. It's salt and pepper. It's exactly the way it's described to me in other instances of an extant, relic hair. The Museum of Gettysburg has a large swath of it. That was Dr. Robert King Stone's own personal that he gave to Enoch Pratt. So I actually got a good deal on it because when they were auctioning it, they didn't know what to say about it. There wasn't a lot to say. And I, being in the position that I am, know, the extent that they were pilfering his hair. The back of the man's head has got to be bald. It's just a line of suture and a wasteland of stubble. So you're welcome to come up and take a peek at this later if you like. I'll leave it right up here. And if you want to hit the lights, I've got